Well, hello, welcome to At Home with the Hugheses with Tim and myself, Rachel.
Yep.
Episode 6, I think we're up to. Just again to point out, for those that might be watching this, we confess we are not at home. We are still not at home. So we're wondering if we need to change the title of the podcast to Not At Home with the Hugheses, because for a whole bunch of practical reasons, it just makes sense to do it here at the offices.
The next two, I'm pretty quietly confident.
Do you feel?
It will be At Home with the Hugheses.
We will live up to the title.
Yes.
But we're actually in a freezing cold loft room out the back of the offices. It's cold now. I feel like last time we did this, it's a bit warmer, but we'll try not to shiver through this. So, Tim.
Yes.
Yes. This week we are going to be talking about, or should I say this episode, we're going to be talking about navigating disappointment.
Yes.
Cheery. It's going to be a cheery episode.
Well, welcome to my year.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, a little revealing, isn't it? But so, essentially looking at themes of disappointment, leading when you don't feel like it, when it feels more like a duty than a joy. Maybe something around where as leaders, we have to admit that we've got things wrong.
Yeah.
Or that we're weak, you know, that we're fallible human beings.
And how we continue to persevere, flourish and thrive and handle setbacks, disappointments, how they don't crush us, but actually we keep journeying through them. Because I think the reality is, if you're a leader, if you're a visionary, if you have high hopes and dreams, then disappointment is going to be part of your life. I think that's been quite an interesting thing for me to come to terms with, because I'm definitely a dreamer. If you've ever done your Strength Finders thing,
I don't think dreamer is a strength, but it's
but my number one thing is futuristic.
Yes,
so my head is always in 5 years' time where everything's going to be amazing and perfect and incredible.
And I'm like, can we just focus on this week?
Yeah.
Like, no, because in 10 years' time, like I don't care what's happening in 10 years' time. We need to concentrate on what's happening like this week.
Yeah, but then everything, and I think it's in some ways it's a healthy thing, but like every Sunday I'm disappointed that we don't see more people come to Christ. You know, I'm disappointed that someone who turns up at church doesn't come back. I'm disappointed in myself. All of these things are very real to my headspace, and I'm sure many listening. And so how do we not allow that narrative or those voices to take us under?
Well, I think, and I think that's right. I think navigating disappointment is probably one of the most important things that we can learn as leaders.
Yeah.
Because, as adults, because the mistake that we can make is to think that when we're in disappointment, that disappointment doesn't then turn toxic within us, but that toxicity doesn't then leak, which it will. The thing is, if you don't deal with disappointment, if you don't process it, we're naive to think that it's not going to spill out and leak on our spouses, on our friends, on the people that we're leading. And so it is imperative, I would say, to learn how to process disappointment. And actually, I think disappointment is one of the key markers of living in this tension between the now and the not yet.
Yeah.
That we took. This is a phrase that we use, stolen from John Wimber, I think, who may have stolen it from somewhere else. But anyway, essentially, that sort of tension between the now and the not yet is articulating this time that we find ourselves in the context of the kingdom of God. That obviously Jesus has lived, died, rose from the dead, and the victory that has been won through that, and we live in a time where the kingdom has come. We see God at work, we see God on the move, and we believe that. And again, the way we're wired as leaders and the type of church that we're trying to lead, we want to be full of faith, full of expectation that God can and does move today, like that he does he does heal, he does answer prayer. The Spirit is at work. At the same time, we also live in the not yet of the kingdom, that we are awaiting the return of Jesus, that we're waiting for the day where every tear will be wiped away, no sadness, no death, no pain. And so we still live in the reality of pain, death, and sadness, and the disappointment that comes with that we pray for certain things and we don't get the outcomes that we would hope for. And so it's this paradox of, on the one hand, having the faith to believe that the kingdom of God is here and that God can and does intervene, and yet also knowing that we're still waiting, that we won't get the outcome that we hope for on every occasion. And so that creates disappointment. And so what are we going to do within that tension? Yeah. Should I just say about the Stockdale paradox? Because I think that helps.
While you're on a roll.
While I'm on a roll. This was something that I read in... You've cleared your throat. Thank you for that.
Sorry,
this was something I read in Good to Great, that book by Jim Collins, that leadership book that I'm sure a bunch have read. He talks about the Stockdale paradox, and essentially Admiral Stockdale was held in a prisoner of war camp for 8 years. And, as you can imagine, the conditions were awful. He was tortured like multiple times. And then when he was released, Jim Collins interviewed Admiral Stockdale. And of course, he asked him like the obvious question, how did you get through it? How on earth did you survive that? And interestingly, Admiral Stockdale said, first of all, he said, well, I got through it because I had this sense that this experience wasn't just something that I was to endure, but that actually it could, I'm paraphrasing here, I haven't got the quote in front of me, but it wasn't just something that I was to endure, but actually it could be a defining moment in my life that could actually change the trajectory of my life. And as it happens, that's what's happened. And actually Admiral Stockdale said, I wouldn't change it now. Yeah. I wouldn't change it now. And then Jim Collins says, okay, well then who didn't make it out? And Admiral Stockdale says that's easy. It was the optimists. Yeah. It was the ones the ones that thought they'd be out by Christmas, and then Easter, and then Christmas. Yeah. And he says they died of a broken heart. And then Stockdale says this, and again I'm paraphrasing. He says, here's the important lesson. This is the paradox. On the one hand, we must never, ever lose sight of the fact that we will prevail. Yeah. Like you let go of that hope, you're stuffed. Yeah. That one day you will prevail. That it's like the end of the story if you let go of that hope. But at the same time, you must never ignore the brutal facts of your current reality. Yeah. And I think that's in essence what we're talking about, this cross-section between the now and the not yet. And within that, at the heart of that cross-section is disappointment. And if we don't deal with it, we're gonna be toxic, not just to ourselves, but also to the people around us.
Yeah. I think that's where I guess lament is really important, because that's what I love about reading the Bible. It's so full of people's brokenness, pain, mistakes, failures, shortcomings, disappointments. And so firstly, that encourages me that it's not unusual. It's not something we're doing wrong to be confronted by difficult, challenging times. But what we see in the Bible is so many people just were able to articulate, were comfortable to voice the pain, the anguish. I think the Psalms, beautiful kind of 150 songs, poetry, utterances of worship. So many of them, there's a bleakness, a darkness, there's a lament to them, which obviously God's very comfortable with. And so I think the first thing I'd say, if I reflect on how I've tried to navigate tough times, is, well, lament needs a voice. I think where it goes horribly wrong is where you turn in on yourself. Like sin, shame, disappointments, they tend to have a way of isolating yourself from others. So you're suddenly kind of moving further and further away from community, from God, and that just exacerbates these hurts, frustrations, wrong thinking. And so actually I think we need to be better at bringing the frustration, the anguish, like Psalm 13, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts? and day after day have sorrow in my heart. Many churches, we wouldn't sing that because we don't want to sort of kill the mood.
Yeah.
But actually that's incredibly helpful to me to understand that when I'm feeling hurt, annoyed by something, the first thing to do is to be honest and real about that. Find ways of for me as a songwriter, that's been a great gift of pouring that out. For others, it might be in friendship groups, talking to people, journaling, whatever it is, we need to
get it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lament needs to find a voice. But the second thing is recognizing lament needs a home. And I think the story of the Bible is that home becomes God. That actually we don't just sort of vent this anger and upset anywhere and everywhere. We bring it to God. And actually as we bring before him those questions, those like, where were you? What happened? Why is this going on? He actually begins to quiet us with his love. We don't necessarily get answers and solutions, but we're reminded that he is with us, which is the ultimate story that holds us and sustains us through those dark valley moments. And I love Walter Brueggemann, an Old Testament theologian. He looks at many of the kind of the rhythms of the people of Israel in the Psalms, and you have this moment of orientation where it's like, God is real, Yahweh is our God, we are his people. This revelation moment, can think of those moments for me where God loves me, he's for me, he's with me. But then we'll always have a disorientation moment where we forgot to let us down. A loss, something's happened to us, and it confuses us. That's where so many people, we see this sort of deconstruction of faith, which leads to pathway of cynicism, disillusionment. I think it can be very negative if it's not ultimately brought before God. So you see the people of Israel, they grumble, they turn away, this disorientation. But then you see this reorientation where it's suddenly this recognition that God, you are still my God. You are still good. Where else do I go other than you? And I trust you. And actually what you find is a more real, deep faith that sustains rather than a more shallow, my faith is dependent on my circumstances. And so actually, like the Stockdale thing, recognizing that these setbacks, these disappointments, if turned towards God, if brought before God, and this is the amazing thing of the gospel and the power of the Spirit, they have the power to strengthen us in our inner being, to make us humbler, stronger, more glorious leaders.
I think you just made up a word there. Humbler.
Humbler. Is that, sorry, for you
terrible grammar, but it was a good point, so we'll let you off.
More humble.
No, I was thinking of that, that kids' book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt.
Yes.
Where essentially they...
Can I just interject?
Yes.
Does anyone else do this?
What?
Where you are reading a book to your kids and you're reading it thinking, well, two things I sometimes do. Can I read this whole book without making a single mistake?
I do that.
Do you do that?
I do that.
And then the second
I wonder
thing...
what that reveals about our personality types.
Competitive.
Yeah. Perfection.
Massive egos.
Dear, yeah. Wowzers.
The other thing is I this is maybe more revealing of the ego. I read it and I think I could be on BBC. What do they call it now? Jack and Nori.
I do that too.
And the voices I'm bringing
I know the accents. I'm really good at accents.
Yeah, I'm really good at this.
Wow.
Do you think that?
I do think that sometimes.
I think probably everyone does, don't they?
I don't know. Maybe it's just us.
Anyway,
you can let
if you're
us
a
know.
psychologist listening to this, please email in. What do we need to do? What was going wrong? Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, we're going on a bear hunt, and it says, "Well, we're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day." That's not the important bit. But on the bear hunt, they can either go, they come up against an obstacle, whether it's mud or
swishy grass.
Swishy. Oh yeah, love that. Yeah.
I mean, listen.
Oh, it's amazing. Any voiceover artist agents listening, you can call Tim. They come up against an obstacle, let's say a disappointment. And they can either...
That's not in the book, though, is it?
No, I'm using it as a metaphor, darling.
I'm with you.
They could either go over it, they can go under it, or they can go through it.
Yes.
And I think when we're confronted with disappointment, we have that choice. And I wonder if to go over it is to try and play God. It's to almost deny that it's there. Well, I think it's two things. Like there's this phrase that's quite popular at the moment, this phrase toxic positivity.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is actually a really important word, two words, for us in the church, particularly our types of church, where we do have a strong now emphasis in terms of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And of course, we are stuffed without faith. Like this isn't about resignation or sort of reducing our faith to I don't know, just, well, if God wants to do it, he can. Like sort of even sort of taking prayer and intercession out of the equation. Not at all. But I do wonder if sometimes faith can be used as a mask for what is actually toxic positivity. And toxic positivity is to say that pain doesn't really exist, or that there isn't space to express it, that if we don't get the answers to the prayers that we're praying in the way that we want to, we just sweep it under the rug, or that we just sort of plaster over our disappointments with toxic positivity. Oh, it'll be fine. And actually I think this does get played out a lot in parenting. And interestingly, there was this course that we did when we were first parents, all around attachment theory, fascinating, called Circle of Security. And one of the things that you have to confront is these core emotions that we all have. And often what happens is, if as adults there are certain core emotions that we don't feel comfortable with, we then find it really uncomfortable when our children express them, because children are emotional machines. They haven't learnt yet to sort of, well, not in the early
Not just children, though.
Well, exactly, to squash them. And so it's quite confronting to suddenly be aware of the emotions in our children that we find uncomfortable. Yeah. And so if our children express disappointment, about something usually fairly trivial, but not always, sometimes as parents, and I think it's really important that we're aware of this, we can want to squash it. Like, oh, no, it's fine. Don't worry. No. Have
or
this
distract.
Instead. Or distract.
Give you chocolate, watch a movie.
Rather than just saying, oh, that's really disappointing. Yeah. Just sitting in the disappointment with our kids and teaching them disappointment is okay. You could, and so if we feel uncomfortable as parents sitting in disappointment with our children, I mean, you can apply this to other things like fear. Again, if we find fear, like quickly distract, cover over, plaster over with toxic positivity, rather than saying, that is quite scary. Sitting with our children in some of those more typically negative emotions, what we're training them to do is say, don't feel them, don't express them, they're bad.
Well, and that's the story of Job.
Yeah.
His world falls apart, loses all his family, he's sick, he's ill, horrendous, and his friends turn up and try and rationalize what's going on theologically, give a framework for it, trying to sort of just give him really bad advice. And actually what he needed was just people to sit with him.
So, this sucks.
Yeah. And that's the sense of presence in those moments of pain. I mean, slightly disconnected, but we can come back to this. I remember when I was at HTB as a curate, and you'd have to do these a week where you were on call, partnering with the hospital. And I'm not a fan of hospitals, so I never, it freaked me out a bit. That's, again, psychologists get in touch. But I remember one time being called, and basically it's just a tragic situation where this lady had just come out of surgery, a major operation on her lung. She had lung cancer, so they were removing a large part of her lung. And while she was in surgery, her husband died in his sleep. So she came around from surgery. He was due to come and pick her up. The hospital trying to get in touch. Eventually got in touch with the daughter, who went to the house to find that her father had passed away in the night. And then I get the call, this lady wants to see a priest. So I'm like, oh my goodness. I think it's one of the most terrified things I've ever had to do. I was driving in, panic. What on earth do you say? How's this going to pan out? What am I going to do? And I was wearing a dog collar. I walked in And before I could say a word, she just said, "Oh, Father," she's always had a more Catholic background. "Father, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming." And then she just like vomited it all up. What's going on? How am I going to cope? Just pain, anguish, grief, shock, all this emotion. And I just listened. I don't really think I said anything apart from at the end, reading Psalm 23 and praying for her. But it just struck me again, the power of that priestly role representing Christ's presence with us at times, not trying to give answers, not saying, well, you need to do X, Y, Z, or this is, but actually just to be there in the midst of the pain. And I think when we try and go over it, run away from it, try and figure out how we get through it.
Do it on our own, basically. Play God, yeah.
It doesn't work. And what you do is you ultimately damage yourself. But what I've seen, if I'm honest, is I can then damage other people or put unnecessary pressure on other people. For example, I can think of times where if I'm feeling stressed or anxious or disappointed with something going on in the
I can't think of any times
life of the church.
It's been like that, Done.
Oh, wait till I get to you. No, but
oh dear.
So, I'm trying to think of it where maybe one of our gatherings wasn't growing in the way I thought it would, or we put on an event and it hadn't quite
gone how we'd wanted, or
or
a success in the way that we'd
whatever
wanted
that
it
means.
to.
Whatever you're imagining in your mind.
Metrics, yeah.
What I can then do, and I think I've got a lot better of it by recognizing it, is like, right, okay, come here, staff. Let me tell you exactly what you need to do. You need to do this.
Take control. Basically.
Take control. Yeah. The reason it's gone wrong is because that, video bit, didn't kick in time, or that song was the wrong song, or we didn't put the chairs out correctly, or
You do have quite an obsessive thing about where the chairs are placed. It's weird.
Yeah, it's my probably my deep best spiritual gift. But what I do then is my anxiety, my disappointment ultimately is then being leaked on everyone else.
Yeah.
Because that's the way I'll cope with it by trying to fix it, and it must somehow be everyone else's fault.
Yeah.
It creates anxiety within the team, and no one is operating from a place of health, from joy, from life. And then it just becomes a very destructive thing for a team. So recognizing when you're trying to grab control is really important, so that you don't actually hold people back. And I've seen so many leaders, so many teams where they're just being held back from being free to run in the gifts and the call that they have because control has kicked in.
Yeah. And the root of the control is I'm not seeing the outcomes that I want.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. And rather than going through it and facing it, I'm going over it and I'm seizing control. I'm going to try and do this in my own way. Yeah. But the other one is...
So can I just, before you go to the other one, but the other thing you do is you kick in even more activity.
Yeah.
Right, okay, we got to work harder.
Shift into a higher gear, yeah.
That's the answer.
Yeah.
And then again, you drive the team to exhaustion. You drive yourself to exhaustion.
Yeah.
And we take on ourselves this responsibility to, our vision in Birmingham is to be light for the city and beyond. 1.1 million people are like, right, we got to convert 1.1 million people, right, we've seen, however many hundred this year, right,
Yeah.
And again, it just becomes very unhealthy.
And that's when disappointment becomes a driver, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like actually disappointment is driving you and it should never be the driver.
No.
But counter to that, disappointment can also cause you to sink, which is to go under. And that's equally unhelpful, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. And I think this is hard. And I guess a lot of it will depend on your wiring and the circumstances. But I think what happens in go under is you get stuck in the feelings, in the emotions that come through disappointment. And they then begin to become a sort of a mode of operation. Yeah. So you start to operate out of victim mode. Everything is everybody else's fault. Mm-hmm. That woe is me, poor me, everything, it always goes wrong for me, and you can get stuck in that mentality, or you start to get resentment, maybe you start to resent God, or you start to resent the role that you have as a leader, or you start to resent other people who seem to be having a better time than you. That's hard.
Or I think what I can do is you start imagining another life.
Yeah.
Right. What next? And your mind goes, it's escapism.
Yeah.
It's distraction to try and, right. So what I'll do is I plan our retirement.
Yeah, well, yes, that is a conversation that you like to have. This is the futuristic thing though as well.
But like
the shadow side.
Traveling around Europe in a camper van mixed with nice hotel. I mean, that's like, let's just do it now. Let's go. Early retirement.
What you fail to add into that equation is the fact that we have 5 children.
Yeah, they'll be grown up by then. They'll be fine.
They'll have grandchildren.
No, they'll be fine.
We'll have parents that need us to look after. So we're going to have we'll have a season.
The point being is you
escape.
Your head goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
To avoid confronting the pain. Can you do you do that?
I think I do both. I think there are times in disappointment where, you know this, that I will go into sort of go over it mode, control mode.
No, but I'd say that is your,
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Like a really sort of inane example would be if I feel like in a family home context, I feel stressed or out of control, I'll just want to like clean the house. I want I just can't. It's like my tolerance for mess just disappears, and that's quite a good warning sign for me that I'm in control mode. I'm feeling out of control.
Or you'll make your
go on.
Your shared notes with all the list of jobs, and then you'll copy me in with all.
Here's what I'm doing, Tim. What are you doing?
No. Here's what I'm doing, and now here's what you're doing.
You need to do. Yeah. So I
get these long lists, and then if I delete one of them, you go mad.
Yeah, it's very annoying. Yeah. But I think I can definitely go under it. I can get stuck and resent. I mean, there was a season of that felt marked by resentment. When I was at home with the kids, you were traveling loads, and I just felt so resentful. I'd got stuck under it.
You hid it well.
Oh, you're such a liar. But I also think another aspect of getting stuck under it is like comparison, jealousy, that you then look at everyone else and think, well, they seem to have it a lot easier than me, a lot better than me. Yeah. Actually, one thing, my sister said this recently, that obedience is never fair. And that I think can often be the root of comparison, is that everybody's individual obedience to the call of God on their lives is going to look different.
Yeah.
But different is rarely fair. And so my obedience could look like, a big house on the coast in Sydney, for example, Australia.
Please.
Sounds amazing.
Go on.
And that could be somebody's obedience.
No, I think it's yours. I definitely think it's yours. And I'm happy to come.
But another person's obedience might look like, I don't know, a caravan in, I don't know.
Don't give those anywhere.
Anyway, but it could do,
Yeah.
I don't want to name a place because then I might be sounding like I'm being rude about a particular place. My point is, obedience isn't fair.
Yeah.
And
so true.
The minute we start to feel hard done by because our walk of obedience doesn't feel quite as nice as somebody else's, we never know what's going on in people's lives. You could be in a big house on the coast of Sydney, but you could be facing real struggles in other ways. And I think that can often be the root of comparison. And it causes us to get stuck under it. So if we're not going to go over it, we're not going to go under it, what does it mean?
What are we going to do?
We're going to go through it. And I think you've alluded to this in your beautiful little summary of lament, and what that means. But because I've been sort of teaching on this a little bit recently, is around the story of Hannah, and I think she does this brilliantly. That there's that basically Hannah, her disappointment is childlessness. She can't conceive. and she desperately longs for a child. And again, remembering that in that context, in that time, in that culture, not having a child had major social, economic, emotional ramifications for a woman. So it was hugely significant. And so she's facing this like colossal disappointment. They've all gone to Shiloh to worship. They've made this journey to Shiloh. And so she's there at the temple. Eli's there. And it's like her disappointment is crystallized in this moment. But there's this, it says this thing. It says, Hannah stood up, full stop. I can't remember what the verse is, 1 Samuel 1. And we read that and think, okay, great, she stood up. But actually it's this Hebrew idiom, a bit like sort of to put your foot down.
Yeah.
Essentially it's Hannah saying, I'm done.
Yeah.
You know, I'm done with this. I need to just face this.
Yeah.
It's like a decisive moment. And in doing so, she goes to the temple, and it says she pours out her soul to the Lord, and she's weeping and she's wailing, and so much so that Eli, the priest there, thinks she's drunk. And she says, no, I'm not drunk. I'm pouring out my soul to the Lord. And it's interesting to me that her going through it, like confronting her disappointment, looks like, well, what you've described, this deeply personal, raw prayer of lament.
Yeah.
And she doesn't stop asking God for the things she wants. She says to the Lord, you know, if you will only remember me and give me a son. So she doesn't stop asking God for this good thing that she wants, but she does it without sort of needing to squash or minimize her disappointment within it. And I just think that that's one of the first things she does that I think is such an important lesson for us in dealing with disappointment. But this, you carry on.
And then we'll come back to the second. So I think then we need, and this isn't, I'd say just for leaders, in any walk of life. I mean, I think one of the most disappointing things I've found is parenting. No, because but more disappointment in myself.
Not with the children.
Not with the kids, but there are moments you get frustrated with them, but more myself. Why am I more patient? Why is that produce that response? Why am I not fighting for more time, more joyful moments? I mean, parenting is hard, but there'll be other areas in your workplace, in your studies where it's hard, but we have to have places to outwork those frustrations. So for us, we both see this amazing lady who I think is every 6 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where it's just an opportunity to get in touch with the emotional stuff going on within the interior life, our world, and to articulate it. In some ways, much of what's happening is not her telling us exactly how we should live, although she brings incredible wisdom. It's just to get it out. I felt hurt here. This was a tough thing to carry. I feel disillusioned. You know, why is this not opening? All of that stuff has actually been a very key way of us articulating the frustrations, the disappointments, the hurts. So you're not allowing it to fester. And I think again, some of our key friends, like we feel it, won't we? If we haven't had time just to be really honest and real and to allow that kind of all that stuff to pour out, and the encouragement of hearing other friends their struggles. It's like, I mean, that's what we meet some different leaders and. It's so encouraging when you hear.
And it's not like a pity party, is it? It's more like we're in this together.
Yes.
It's a relief. It's a release. I was actually thinking about that story of your dad's when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And your dad, I think it'd be fair to say he was raised in a family where, and this was of course years and years and years ago, different generation, where it wasn't acceptable to express some of those more difficult emotions. And as I said about this parenting thing that we did, one of the key learnings is creating spaces to sit in those more difficult emotions with our children and not just squashing them or covering them up. And for your dad, I remember him telling the story that when you were a kid, and I don't know, maybe you weren't allowed a second cookie or something like that, I don't know. And you just sort of let rip at your dad, like
I jumped into his arms and I was pounding
my
fist against his chest.
You tell the story.
Saying, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And my dad said, well, look, he just remember thinking, I wish I had that kind of relationship with my earthly father where I could be that honest.
That just wasn't acceptable.
And angry. Yeah, that he had to bottle it, swallow it.
Yeah.
But then he said, this is just a beautiful picture of what it is to come before God with those, how long, O Lord?
Yeah.
Why have you seemed to turn your face away from me?
Yeah.
And actually what happened is I was pounding my fist on his chest, crying and shouting and screaming, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And after a while, exhausted myself and fell asleep in his arms. And again, it's that picture in Zephaniah 3:17 that the Lord your God is with you, he's mighty to save. He will quiet you with his love.
Yeah.
He will rejoice over you with singing. And again, that's, I think, what happens when we articulate and we that thing of lament, finding a home in God, we then find this peace that enables us to pass through the valley, the shadow of death.
Well, that's the thing about the Hannah story, is that she pours out her soul to the Lord. Yeah. She prays this, really raw prayer. Yeah. She brings the request. Yeah. So again, she doesn't stop asking God for this good thing she wants. But it says, after she'd prayed, it says she sort of walks away. She has something to eat. That's good.
Yeah.
And
ice cream helps me feel a lot.
I don't think it would have been ice cream. But then it says her face is no longer downcast.
Yeah.
And that happens like literally moments after she's prayed this, sort of poured out her soul to the Lord. And of course, there's no way she could be pregnant. Like God could not have answered her prayer by then. So her face no longer being downcast is not a result of the answered prayer. It's the peace that has come through expressing her disappointment, through expressing her desire to the Lord. And I think actually Tim Keller, he sort of summarizes it brilliantly, that the sequence in that moment for Hannah is prayer, peace, and then pregnancy or provision. Yeah. And so often we want it the other way around. Yeah. We want it to be prayer, provision, and then you get peace through having the provision. And actually, I think the key to living in the tension between the now and the not yet, living in the tension of disappointment, is to express the disappointment, bring the request, but then allow the peace to come regardless of what the provision will look like. Yeah. And that is hard, but also so liberating.
Well, I mean, we're feeling that now. One of our kids, the schools, trying to figure out what next.
Yeah.
And even as you're saying that, I'm thinking, that's, for me, we've been praying, God, bring your peace and trust you for the provision.
For the outcome.
Rather than the other way around. Did you say there was a second?
That was it.
That was it. Oh, brilliant.
Sorry.
So what was it? It needs articulation and then space to receive the peace of Christ.
Well, surrender, isn't it? It's bring it, express it, but then surrender to the outcome. Because if you bring it with strings attached, like I actually, this is the outcome that I'm holding on for, that's the disappointment. That's where we're robbed of peace. That's where we're stuck in disappointment, because the request is so attached to the outcome that there's no room for God to be God. And
as we close...
that was as we close. You're right. We need to time.
Well, I found it very helpful.
Thank you.
I mean, Jesus models this with his leadership at the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's facing the cross and he's asking, is there any way out of it? Can I go over it, under it, please?
Yeah. Can I have a different outcome?
Yeah. But ultimately, he articulates it. The emotion is, he's sweating droplets of blood and water. And then he says, not my will, but yours be done.
Surrender.
And he surrenders. And so I think... For us as leaders, as parents, as a married couple, friends, that is the pathway to keeping on going, to sustaining consistency, faithfulness. It's not my will, but yours be done. It's ultimately surrender. And there are moments, we'll all have to face. We're feeling it acutely now, where we're having to engage with things that we'd really rather run away from. I'm thinking a lot of when Jesus reinstates with Peter, after Peter's disowned him 3 times, and, do you love me? All of that stuff. But then he says, Jesus says to him, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go.
Yeah.
And I think for me as a leader, I'm coming to terms with that. There are places and things I have to do now I really don't want to do. I have to experience suffering and setbacks. That's part of the cost of being a Christ follower, part of the cost of leadership. But in that is extraordinary amounts of joy, extraordinary amounts of blessing and favor and life. And final thing I just want to encourage people with, because there are so many things that are challenging, fill your cup with joy. Yeah. Fill your cup with those encouragements. You know, with the church, I keep a little email folder of all the encouraging stories. Yeah. That's why Sundays we try and tell as many encouraging stories, because people always are fed with bad news, but there's so much good news. And part of me is doing it for me. Yeah. That actually there are hard things here, but look at all the incredible things going on. Yeah. And that, you know, for the joy set before Jesus endured the cross. So that again is a key thing to help us keep going as leaders.
Very good. The end.
The end. We'll see you soon for session 7.